It is exciting to see this chapter's birth, the triangle, and good to see each of you here this evening. Thank you so much, Jennifer, Carol, and Shelley, for inviting me to share my personal story, Downhill at 40, on obstacles and entrepreneurship, and how it led to adding a China practice to my consulting firm, about the obstacles I've had to overcome, and about being an entrepreneur and growing my business. So I opened up my eyes and did not know where it was. It seemed like I was surrounded by a hospital setting, perhaps, maybe even an intensive care unit. But why was my neck in a brace, and what were all these bruises from? And why did my body feel so sore and immobilized? Gan gan. So my mother told me that my first words to her were these, gan gan. I uttered when she was trying to change my diaper. She said that I was informing her of my wishes early, as I told her not to bother changing my diaper as I was still dry. So interestingly, while I was lying on my back in the ICU on the prior visual, my body temporarily immobilized, and with my broken neck and a closed head injury, not remembering any short-term events, the most fascinating things were happening as my long-term memory came back to life in their stead. Mandarin was flooding my memory, the first language that surrounded me through my parents, my first months on Earth. So I grew up in Atlanta, Georgia, as the younger of two daughters. My parents were both born in China and left before the communist takeover in 1949 to attend college in Taiwan. My mother was from Shanghai and my father from Yangzhou, and the only members of their respective families to leave China during this very turbulent time. They came to the U.S. on scholarship to pursue further studies. My father for his engineering PhD, and my mother to pursue her true love, music. And from there, my father joined the faculty at Georgia Tech for nearly 40 years, and my mother taught piano. My sister grew up to be an internationally awarded classical pianist who studied and then taught at Juilliard. So growing up in the South in Atlanta in the 1960s through the early 80s, the Chinese population was quite small at that time. I was the epitome of a banana. Does anyone here know what that means? Well, this analogy is like saying one is an Oreo. I was yellow on the outside, but quite white on the inside. I probably just wanted to fit in. I was not necessarily curious or interested in my Chinese heritage with its funny accents, odd superstitions, and so un-American foods of eating fish with heads and cracking dried melon seeds as snacks over long hours of mahjong. So at the same time, I was surrounded by a large Chinese family. I thought everyone's dad was a Chinese professor at, you might recognize this picture if you've been through Atlanta, this is Georgia Tech today. Or everyone's dad was a professor, maybe not at Georgia Tech, but at Emory, as these were our weekend families who we hung out with. Auntie and uncles Wu, Chu, Ho, Chins, and their kids. In fact, when Professor Chen moved in town and joined the Georgia Tech faculty, the daughter closest in age to me came to my high school, tried out for cheerleading, where I was a teacher, and everyone just assumed that we must be related. So we decided to adopt each other and call ourselves cousins. My parents hoped that I might retain some of our Chinese heritage and sent me in carpool every Saturday morning with these other kids to downtown Atlanta near Georgia Tech to Chinese school. Now, I get motion sickness very easily. In fact, I haven't gone on a cruise to this day in my life, even though it's been highly suggested to me because of this motion sickness. And so I threw up in carpool one Saturday. I went home and told my mom that I no longer wanted to continue my Chinese studies. And she did not force me to continue. So decades later, 10 years ago, I faced the same dilemma. My son, half Chinese, half Italian, decided he didn't want to go to Saturday Chinese school here in Cary either. But today, as you all know, thousands of non-Chinese young people are going to Chinese immersion programs. They're studying Chinese in elementary, high school, and college, and going to China to study. How the world has indeed changed. The summer after my junior year in high school, I had a fellowship to travel to Germany on foreign exchange. I was all ready to tell the young people in my small town of Elberslau outside Münster, Germany, all about life in the United States. However, in my presentations at school, the students, seeing my Chinese facade, my Chinese face, they asked me instead about China. How dare they? But this revelation, this aha experience that summer in Germany, I realized I had little to almost nothing to share about China, given my growing up as a banana. And at that moment, decided that my next study abroad would enable me to learn more about my roots. Well, I didn't have to go literally overseas to help rediscover my roots. Instead, the college I chose to attend, MIT, helped tremendously. Many joke that MIT stands for Made in Taiwan due to the large number of students who have a relationship to that island. Within days of stepping on campus, I met so many neat Chinese and Asian friends who were not necessarily super geeks. Rather, they were quite cool. And I realized that we all had so much in common. Our parents' life stories, our desire to learn and work hard, to do science experiments, all at the same time while playing a musical instrument. So today, this is simply what so many students of all backgrounds are doing, and indeed need to be doing, in order to be globally competitive in today's day and age. The bar for entry into college, if any of you are close to your children going to college or have friends who are experiencing it, it's just never been higher, given the great increases of number of applicants aspiring to obtain further education. So, instead of being uninterested or even ashamed of my roots, entering college decades back was the start of my fascination with my roots. By my senior year, the same student who decided to drop out of Chinese school as a girl decided to immerse herself in the study of Chinese every waking moment during my winter month off at MIT. Does anyone recognize the university in the picture? It's Wellesley College in the summer. I was going there in January. It was snowing every day. I took a bus at the break of dawn, drove an hour to Wellesley, spent all day there, and then came back to my dorm room at MIT and studied all night and just loved it. It was one of the most amazing things I did during my college experience. So it probably won't surprise you that right after graduation, I chose to go to Taiwan for further exploration. No longer a banana, this trip started the journey of my interest in better understanding my roots and what it meant to be Chinese. During the week, I studied Chinese and culture, and every weekend I went to Taipei and stayed with my Taipei grandpa and his family. That Taipei grandpa, he is the great uncle who adopted my mother in order for her to escape the communist overtaking China. I treasure that summer spending time with my Taipei grandpa very much. Then a few years later, while working on my MBA at Harvard, I had the chance to intern in Hong Kong for my employer before business school, Time Inc., a Fortune 500 publishing company. And my assignment was on exploring new market opportunities in Southeast Asia for Time Asia. This started my passion, my love for working in new and emerging markets, a lot of what I do today. So that summer also gave me the opportunity for my first trip to China. This is back in 1990, where I had the chance to meet my grandma, who I'd heard so much about for the first and sadly only time. My mom's family did not own a car, so they rented a small bus to meet me and my fiance at the Shanghai airport. This was 24 years ago, a complete world change from the massive and modern Shanghai airport of today. I'll never forget the words my grandma said to me when she met me at the airport. 你的妈妈很能干, which means your mother is very brave. These words coming out of my extremely petite grandma, who stood barely 5 feet tall, my own petite mother is just over 5 feet tall, those words are forever ingrained in my memory. I've said it to my son many times. He has it memorized now, since he never got a chance to meet his great-grandma. Now, I didn't quite understand the full meaning of my grandma's words at that time, but I look back at many points in time of my growing up and now in recent months, since my parents have moved to Chapel Hill to be near me, and I much better understand my grandma's wise words. I'll also never forget one summer afternoon I was watching soap operas while eating lunch with my mom and sister. We heard the mailman go past our house, so my mom went out to get the mail. We knew she must have opened a very special letter as she ran into our family room, excitedly telling me and my sister that she had gotten official approval for her to see her mother and family once again after 26 long years of separation. So here's a photo of my mom, my grandma, and my aunties in their Shanghai reunion. So fast forward to nearly a decade ago. For my 40th birthday, I decided to treat myself to a week cycling trip in Sonoma. Little did I know that I would literally go downhill on Sonoma Mountain Road and have to be airlifted unconscious to literally a new state of mind. My neuro team told me I shouldn't work for a couple of months. So when not in physical or occupational or cognitive therapy appointments, I had a lot of time on my back recovering to ruminate on my life, past, present, and future. And I decided that I was going back to China. I wanted my son to meet his great-grandma who had recently turned 90. And my cycling accident made me realize so much so that life is short and one must treasure each day and cherish it as if it were to be one's last. I realized that I was given a second chance at life. So during my recovery, I booked tickets for as soon as my son finished 3rd grade. During that same time, China was gaining more and more headline attention. It was chosen as a venue for the 2008 Olympics, where our local company, Cree here, local LED company, was to light up both the Water Cube and the Bird's Nest venues beautifully. And China was becoming a dominant business superpower given the relaxation in the quasi-communist state and the weakening of the U.S. economy. Around that time, the co-founder of the North Carolina Chinese Business Association, Yenqing Zhang, asked me to serve as an advisor to the NCCBA, which was formed to build bridges between NC and China business. Given my Chinese heritage, my growing consulting business, and interest in NC-China relations, I was intrigued in figuring out how I could add value to the China-US-NC value chain. My parents had traveled from Atlanta to live temporarily with me to take care of me and my son during my recovery. My head injury and my parents living with me created a temporary language comeback. I recall on one of my later post-accident visits where I told my neurologist that my Chinese was fading. And she said, good news, bad news, your brain is healing. I was excited for my summer 2006 China discovery trip. I wanted my son to see China, and it had been way too long since my first trip there. Landing in the Shanghai airport 16 years after my first trip, the change in just under 2 decades is almost too much for words to describe. The airport that my grandma and family had rented a small van to pick me and my fiance up was just a hovel compared to this grand airport. Isn't it beautiful? Today, Shanghai even has 2 airports and ranks as one of the busiest of all airports in the world. So during this trip, I discovered there was a lack of Western-trained business school professors to teach in the very fast-growing MBA program market in China. Business schools simply could not manufacture MBAs fast enough to fulfill Chinese companies' needs. So for the next 2 summers, I served as guest faculty teaching marketing and innovation at Fudan University in Shanghai in joint venture with MIT Sloan School. Like my Chinese immersion class at Wellesley during my senior year at MIT, I just loved teaching in China. I was starting to teach at Keenan Flagler Business School here at UNC Chapel Hill about the same time. And it was fascinating to study the differences in MBA students in China and in the U.S. In U.S., it was just quite different. So in China, on the last day of class, my students wanted to stay longer to thank me and seemingly like eulogize me. I actually pinched myself to realize, yes, Grace, you are still alive. They were eulogizing me and thanking me for changing their way of thinking. They had never experienced the way that I taught before. So I use a Western style teaching. It's actually not used at all business schools, even here and in the States, because I use a very interactive way of teaching with cold calling that I experienced at Harvard Business School, case study, not lecture, and rather heavy in student involvement in group study. So this was very foreign to the students in China because things are changing now, but they were more used to a lecture format. So, and as I said, all this is very quickly changing. But it was really, really neat to be a part of this and being in the early stage of this back in the late 2000s, around 2007, 8 timeframe. So I was asked, since this is an organization of women in international trade, a little bit about how my personal story relates to the professional story. And so several years ago, my firm added a China practice to our consulting firm. This newer offering is an exciting one, which I've very much enjoyed. I love working with our Chinese consulting team. I love looking at new markets for companies where China is a new market for them, or it's a market maybe they've been in for a few years, but they're looking on how they can do better because, as you all know, China is a huge opportunity, but it's a very, very challenging opportunity to really do well in. We've met with companies in China that are looking to enter the U.S. market, as well as U.S. companies looking to enter China, or Western companies who've already been in China for many years, and then they hire us to have their China business audited and make recommendations on how they can improve. So China is not easy, but can offer big opportunity. And since you all are here in North Carolina, we've also worked with companies here who have core to their business, bridging opportunities between North Carolina and China. For instance, we've worked within higher education since so many students from China want to come and study here in the United States. And for another company that has business in China already but doesn't have a physical presence, they've asked us to help them think through the plan and the process to make sure they do it right. It's also been great to have the opportunity to advise Cree that I mentioned earlier that lit up the Beijing Olympics on their China business, given that their role in historical moments in China, and China has become a critical part of their business. So we've published over the last almost decade on our China observations on doing business in China. I've given many talks on the topic, including case studies from companies even here in your own backyard, for instance, Cree, as I mentioned, Burt's Bees, and Duke Energy. So you asked me to speak a little bit about obstacles I've overcome. So everyone here, I think, has had their own cycling accident. Is that correct? Okay, I see a show of hands that everyone, if it's not a physical, literal cycling accident, you've had your metaphorical cycling accident. So my cycling accident was an obstacle that was truly life-changing, with my head injury, my memory loss, on top of the physical issues that I was dealing with my broken neck and not being able to drive and not being able to work at what some people call grace speed, but giving time to reflect on life. So it created phase 2 of my interest in China. So here is a logo from a company I worked for. So personally, one obstacle I've overcome is the unexpected end to my marriage. When my son was 14 months old, it threw me for a loop. So I quickly realized I was not going to stay home and have more kids. I was with my second emerging growth company, and unlike my first one, where I joined after a successful IPO, this IPO back in 1997 did not go well. So I realized that I needed to be self-sufficient, completely self-sufficient, and also I was responsible for a newborn. So I needed to find a better professional opportunity. So when a colleague was recommending in the break room one day that I connect with one of his former CEOs who might be a good person to point to a new opportunity, I took note. So when I got back to my desk, it was interesting. I had 2 voicemails waiting for me. One was from an investor friend in Atlanta who wanted me to consider VP opportunities at 2 of his most recent investments. And then the second voicemail waiting for me when I got back to my desk was from the CEO of one of these 2 investments. And he invited me to lunch later that week. And by the end of that week, I had an offer to join that startup, which I didn't think I had the experience or I was ready to do. But given the personal obstacles that I was up against, I accepted, thinking it was the only choice given my circumstances. I was simply going to have to figure it out. So perhaps out of fear, I had to be courageous, and I just went for it. So moving from a situation where I was working modified hours, less than full-time when I was adjusting to working with a newborn, I moved to a situation where I was working almost all my waking hours and finding time to take care of a newborn somehow in snippets in between working. So at this very fast-paced startup, and this was during the time of the bubble, mind you, I faced tremendous challenges, but I actually see them more as opportunities, as due to this very tough personal situation I was facing as a suddenly single mom of an infant, my marketing team and my leadership team, they became my family. So out of sheer necessity, I became enormously resourceful to do my job well, as I simply needed to do so. I really had no other choice. And as that CEO, my boss at that time, told me many years later, because I still keep up with him, he said, "I can always count on you. You will things to happen." So I must say, and I'm sure you've experienced this too, that personal adversity allows one to will things to happen. So within a couple of years, my company was successfully acquired by Siebel Systems, which was then the fastest growing software company in the world, where I stayed on for a year to manage the integration of my company. And have any of you guys been involved in acquisition and integration? Okay, yeah, I see the head nods. So integration by definition is painful. And I was obligated to stay on for the year sentence. And those I trusted advised me to do so and make the most and learn, as this was such an interesting company, fastest growing software company in the world. And they must be doing a few things right. So I listened to the advice that my mentors gave me. And after that role, where I grew tremendously, I went on to be VP of Worldwide Marketing for a later stage private equity-backed tech company, and then a smaller, earlier stage company where the co-founder of OpenSite had invested, and he had referred me into the management team, given what I had done for his startup. And both of these experiences were very tough for very different reasons, and they offered very different challenges. And while each was not the good fit that OpenSite was, in fact, they were both very bad fits, I learned and grew from each. It's amazing how you can learn maybe even more from very, very difficult experiences than those that kind of really go well. Although I learned from all of the above there. So, and sometimes these experiences, the difficult ones, they are definitely not fun. They are very, very painful. But they make me, today, a better person. And for me, definitely makes me a much better business consultant. I'm able to empathize with more of my clients. And now it's a combination of the many, many years of in-house management experience, going from large Fortune 500 to emerging growth companies where I was an executive, to now having well over a decade of consulting experience, working with over 100 different engagements and scenarios. So it's what I love. I love advising these clients. So back in 2003, after these 5 emerging growth tech companies, I finished those. I decided I would strike out on my own and leverage this collective skill set to serve clients. So why did I start Savvy? I spent several months thinking through how I could best add value, enjoy my work, and fit with my personal situation as a single mom, and still fulfill an unmet need. So I was asked today to kind of share how my personal adversities helped me in my own personal entrepreneurship and starting my business, and then I help many entrepreneurs today. So Savvy is a marketing strategy and management consulting firm where we help executives address key business issues to drive their corporate growth. So if you look at the pattern amongst all our clients, we're hired when a company reaches a key inflection point and seeks external and experienced guidance to further their growth of their core business, or sometimes they want to launch a new channel or product offering. One CEO recently called us his strategic weapon, and his president called us his corporate therapist. So we've helped clients across industries: technology, healthcare, consumer, financial and business services, education, and nonprofit sectors. And it's been fulfilling to see these emerging growth companies maximize their potential and have successful exits through acquisition or IPO, or work with the larger companies, the Fortune 1000 companies, on new channels or technologies to continue their growth. So, and just summing up in the last few minutes here, this virtuous cycle loop here on this visual. So I started my career at Bain while even still at MIT. And so it's interesting how nearly 30 years later I've gone full cycle doing similar management consulting work. So we really do work well beyond marketing now, but strategic marketing is a common through line and was a functional role that I played in my last 3 in-house positions. So we do our best work when we're hired by a business owner or CEO, and then oftentimes we work day to day with one of their executives to help them launch new products, start new markets. They all have growth goals, so sometimes we're called a growth consultant. So new has always been a passion. For instance, when I worked at the larger companies, the new product launches was what I had most passion. So for instance, at Sports Illustrated, I was hired to help them figure out how to monetize their video offerings. So some of you, does anyone here remember way back when the campaign that Sports Illustrated had where they offered their blooper videos to gain new subscribers? Okay, I see a few of you do. So what was happening was a lot of their subscribers, loyal subscribers, were falling off the subscriber file in order to get this free blooper video, which was pretty funny. So this made Sports Illustrated realize that they could create a separate business, perhaps a Sports Illustrated catalog, and mail to their most loyal SI subscribers unique and proprietary Time-Inc. products. And so I had the exciting job of creating these novel products using amazing assets of the Time-Inc. library. For instance, I saw one time on our monthly financials that we had this holding cost and keeping some asset that we had in storage and in special temperature control and all this. I said, what is this thing that we're spending money on? And I found out it was this first issue of Sports Illustrated. And so I thought, oh, wow, it's costing us money now. Why don't we create a special edition issue of Sports Illustrated? So that was one of our Neiman Marcus product offerings, where we leather bound it, personalized, and it actually had the original Topps baseball cards inside this first edition. So I treasure, because I have one of them, I treasure it for my son's grandchildren. Someday they'll marvel at it when nothing is paid for anymore, and certainly paper magazines is definitely a antique collectible. So I became the buyer for the business. It was the most fascinating job. And at General Mills, my favorite part of that role, one of my favorite, I really love General Mills, was working on new dessert products. I was being paid to go try new flavors and new textures. At OpenSite that I talked about earlier, we created a new category. And as I mentioned, China is new to us, or it's not new to our firm, but it's new. It fits in that liking of new. So new market opportunities for many companies now as they want to grow their global footprint. So as I tell the many students that I interact with, whether as their professor or if I do a guest speaking engagement, I always tell students and other people too, that do what you love and the rest will follow. So some of the new things that we're doing for our firm in our second decade, we're so many of our clients have had successful exits, so we've added M&A advisory. We're partnering with a seasoned M&A boutique investment advisory firm, and then we're also adding innovation. One of our partners is had originated out of the MIT Innovation Center, and we're enjoying working on innovation projects together. And so those are things that keep me excited in addition to our core management consulting and marketing strategy practice. So thank you so much for being such a great audience and for allowing me to share the topic of downhill at 40. Really? It's not really. Life improves. Definitely, as I near 50, it only improves. So I now would really welcome having you maybe share some of your experiences and questions. Thank you so much.